when you're in pain, soothing as a springtime rain, to have a friend right in your corner. Your heart will feel a little warmer. Tender loving care, tender loving care. Each warm and friendly touch lets someone know you care so much. Tender loving care, tender loving care.
Hello, my name is David Meyer. I'm sitting in for Dr. Amen today. I'm a Seventh-day Adventist, and as Seventh-day Adventists, we see the Bible as combining spiritual and physical, as God being interested in not just our physical welfare, but in our spiritual welfare too, and giving us information and instruction that can help us in that area as well. In seeing how this fits together, let's look at Psalm 103. And today we're going to look at some of these things, and then we're going to apply it to preventing cancer. So in Psalm 103, we read, "Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me. Bless His holy name." So He wants our whole being to respond to Him. "Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all His benefits." He pours out benefits upon us. He blesses us in abundance, and He wants us to remember those things and to appreciate them, to be aware of them. "Who forgiveth all thine iniquities, who healeth all thy diseases." So here we see forgives our iniquities, the spiritual, heals our diseases, the physical. And just in parallel thoughts, just right there close together. So we see that He's interested in both of them. "Who redeemeth thy life from destruction, who crowneth thee with loving kindness and tender mercies, who satisfieth thy mouth with good things, so that thy youth is renewed like the eagles." So here we see that He wants to give us good food, food that's good for us, food that gives us energy and health, and renews our youth, that's invigorating to us. So we see He's interested not only in our spiritual welfare, but in our physical welfare as well. So let's just review the ways in which, the mechanisms in which that He has set up to maintain our health. He heals all our diseases. So we have the blood clotting and the wound healing. The blood clotting mechanism that's all through the circulatory system that we looked at a little more the last time as we were looking at heart disease. But it's there to protect us if we get cut in any place, or even bruises and internal bleeding. It can protect us from losing large quantities of blood. The chemical and physical balances in our body. Chemical balances like the acid-base balance. The physical balances like temperature and blood pressure. The body's ability to neutralize poisons, to deal with a variety of poisons. Now, all these systems can be overwhelmed, but they have an amazing ability to protect us. So, poison neutralization system can handle things like alcohol or insect stings or poisonous bites, like poisonous snake bites and so forth. The body goes to work immediately to neutralize these poisons. The body is equipped to deal with bacteria and viruses to destroy these things and to protect us. And then the body can even deal with its own cells that go berserk or that go out of control and that produce cancer. The body has cells in the immune system, natural killer cells, that perform this important work. So, because of all these things, 80% of the people who go to the doctor would get well if the doctor did nothing. And so, again, there's a place for doctors. What they do is important. but they need to work with the mechanisms that are there to accomplish their work, and those mechanisms are working all the time and protect us many times without our even being aware of it. Now, let's look at the food aspect of how God deals in this area. The Bible says, "And God said, Behold, I give you every herb bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree, and the which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed, to you it shall be for meat," or for food. So God made man for a certain kind of food. He made the food to meet the needs of man. And then after the fall, he added the herb of the field. "Now shall eat the herb of the field," in Genesis 3:18. So we see that God is interested in our physical welfare. He provides us food that is for to meet our needs. And a Christian writer summarized this in these words: "Grains, fruits, nuts, and vegetables constitute the diet chosen for us by our Creator." Not just chosen, but specifically made or created for us. These foods, prepared in as simple and natural a manner as possible, are the most healthful and nourishing. Then science agrees with this, saying that we should eat a whole foods, plant-based diet while minimizing the consumption of refined foods, added salt, and added fats. And this is from a book called The China Study, page 242. It was written by Dr. T. Colin Campbell, who was a nutrition researcher at Cornell University. And this is what the way he summarized the things that he discovered during his career of research and reviewing the scientific literature in his field. And we're going to look at his work a little bit more as we explore cancer. So we see that God has built in these healing mechanisms. He's given us food, that these things are for our protection and for our safety in this world. So the food is fruit, grains, nuts, and vegetables that are enjoyable, that are filled with nourishment and taste and texture and color that's good for us, not artificial colors, but colors that are reflective of the antioxidants that like many of the foods contain. And so the color here is beneficial, health-wise as well as being attractive. Now, how does all this apply to cancer? Well, let's think about growth and how the cells normally operate, and then we'll look at a little bit at what the situation is with cancer. As we begin life, we begin as an egg cell that's fertilized by a sperm cell, and then that fertilized egg cell, a single cell, begins to divide. As that cell divides, after about 30 hours, we have a couple cells. After 40 hours, we have 4 cells. After 3 days, we have a small mass of cells. After 4 days, a little bigger mass. And so this original cell has divided and then continues to divide. And the mass of cells grows. After 5 days, we see here it's starting to take a little bit of shape. And so there is genetic information built into the DNA of these cells that's guiding what they're doing. After 21 days, we have more shape. And now, during this time, we begin to have some circulation here because there needs to be a supply of nutrients and oxygen to all these cells that are dividing. So we're getting some specialization here. And so by 38 days, here we have form. You can see some of the circulatory system there. So the body is, so the cell division is taking place, and growth and development is taking place. And as the cells start to divide, they start out just one cell, and then it divides into 2 cells that are the same, and then they divide into each of those divides into 2 cells that are the same. But at some point, there starts to be differentiation, or cells start to produce offspring that are different and that carry out specialized functions. For instance, here we have bones. So at some point they begin to form bone cells. And at some point they begin to form blood cells. And this continues until finally we have a creature that is a living creature that is born and is able to live on its own, to breathe, and to carry on the processes of life with all the specialized, organs and systems and so forth. And the multiplication of the cells has continued to this point where we have a living baby. This is actually our first grandchild, and here we have another picture of Lorelei. Now watch your eyes, and then her eyes pop open. So we have a creature that is born, is able to live, but growth doesn't stop at this point. Then they continue to grow, and over a period of years, until finally we have an adult, and then an adult. At maturity, growth stops. We don't get any taller, and usually we hope that we don't get any wider. But we start out as one fertilized egg cell, a single cell, and those cells divide until an adult human being contains about 100 trillion cells. And at that point, growth stops. And we don't need more cells. We have to replace ones that die. We have to replace ones that get damaged when there's injury that needs to be repaired. But we don't need to continue to grow. And so the process changes from continuing cell division to just replacing things that have been, that need to be replaced. So let's just summarize this. We have development and growth that takes place as the organism is living. This development is precise and accurate at every stage. As the child grows, as the child is in the womb, this growth and development is precise at every stage. The DNA, the genetic code that's in every single cell has the information that's needed to produce that, all the systems and organs, different kinds of cells and so forth. And then when the child is born, this growth continues. The baby is just a few pounds, but it continues to grow. It grows in size, and there's maturity, there's mental development, there's physical development. The muscles get stronger, it gets coordination. It comes to the place where it can talk and walk and so forth. And as the child gets older, they gain maturity and judgment and so forth. And so we see this development take place, and it's precise and accurate at every stage. What's necessary can be accomplished. And if a child doesn't begin to talk at the right age or begin to walk at the right age, we're concerned that the proper growth and development isn't taking place, and that's legitimate. The body has built-in mechanisms that protect us from multiple threats at every stage. So as we saw that in some of the body's healing mechanisms, we're protected from all kinds of dangers that we face. And once the proper growth is accomplished, growth stops. I can't overemphasize the importance of this or the significance of this and how it relates to cancer. Now, all this has a purpose. The purpose is so that we can survive as a being, and not just survive, but thrive, be healthy and well, and grow properly. Now, in this world of sin, there are accidents, there are problems, there are difficulties, there's destructive things happen, and there's physical and spiritual dangers. So God has equipped us to deal with, just the healing mechanisms of our body, to deal with injury. I do carpenter work, and I get nicks and scratches and bruises and things like that routinely, and I don't worry about it because I know unless it's fortunately I haven't cut off any fingers with a saw or something like that, But just a little nick or a scratch, I don't even worry about it. It's going to heal. And so God has given us these mechanisms for dealing with those things. So He's made provision for this, and He wants us to understand what He's doing. And He wants us to be able to have that understanding so we can actively pursue a relationship and an interaction with Him and actively engage in service with Him. So He wants us to understand what He's doing so we can cooperate with what He's doing. Now, normal cells, then, as we've just been looking at, they're under the control of the DNA. That's the genetic code or the genetic information or the genetic program in the cells. They're under that control. They're communicating with the surrounding cells, so the cells communicate with the cells around them so that they can work in cooperation. So they're cooperating with those surrounding cells. And they only divide when needed. Essentially, when a neighboring cell dies, then that needs to be replaced. And so the neighboring cell divides to replace the one that died. Or if there's an injury and they need to repair the injury, then cells need to divide to accomplish that. But apart from that, the cells, unless there's a need, the cells are under the control of the DNA and this cooperative working with the cells around them. So, there are multiple barriers to cancer. We'll just look at this in a moment. But, for instance, here is the barrier around a prison. Now, I work at FCI Gilmer, go there and have a Bible study sometimes. And they don't want you to take pictures there, so this is just a generic picture of a prison fence. But look at this. There you see the outer fence, and then on the top of it is razor wire, and then there's a space, and then there's a pile of razor wire, and another fence with razor wire at the top of it. So, if an inmate is wanting to break out, why do they have a fence like this? Well, it's so that there'll be multiple barriers. If he makes it over the one fence, he's still going to get through the razor wire and get over the other fence. And so it makes it more difficult to escape. All right, the body does the same thing with the barriers to cancer. There are multiple barriers that the body has built into the DNA to keep cells from going independent or rogue or doing their own thing contrary to what is important for the body. If there are too many cells, it leads to increased apoptosis. That's self-destruction. It's where the cells destroy themselves or they decompose and the material is recycled. So if there's too many cells, then you have more of this self-destructing taking place. They don't divide if they're stressed or if they have DNA damage. There are set limits to the number of times that a cell can divide. It's from like 25 to 50. But then when they get to that limit, they can't divide anymore if they follow the program. And they depend for survival on signals from their normal environment. Otherwise, they self-destruct. Normal environment, that's the cells around them. So they're dependent upon that to be able to continue. Now, these barriers are built into the DNA, and they can only be overcome if the DNA is damaged. DNA damage produces mutations, and if these mutations are at the location of one of these barriers, then that barrier can be destroyed. Multiple sites of damage or multiple mutations are necessary for cancer to develop because of the multiple built-in barriers. This damage is caused by carcinogens. Carcinogens are things that cause DNA damage, such as chemicals. There are chemicals that are carcinogens. We're going to look at one of those a little bit later. Another one is there are viruses that can cause DNA damage, and of course radiation can cause DNA damage. For instance, when you go for an X-ray, the X-ray technician will often have a lead apron on, or they will step behind a wall when they take the X-ray. That's to protect them from the X-rays. The radiation can cause DNA damage, and they're exposed to it constantly. You just get one X-ray and you're gone, and you aren't exposed to that. There's also background radiation, just in the from gamma rays from space, and radioactive materials in the soil like radon and uranium and so forth. It's an insignificant amount, and so we aren't usually worried about it. Now, metastasis is the spreading of cancer. This is a complex, slow, inefficient process. Few cells escape into the blood, and then less than 1 in thousands and perhaps 1 in millions survive. The body, remember the healing mechanisms? The body is able to deal with cancer. Cancer gets into the blood. The body normally detects it and destroys it. So perhaps 1 in millions survive. The body is constantly dealing with this and effectively preventing the cancer. Cancer cells disregard internal and external signals that regulate cell proliferation or cell continued multiplication. They tend to avoid suicide by apoptosis. They circumvent programmed limitations to proliferation. In other words, this limit of how many times they can replicate or duplicate, and also differentiation when they change from one kind of a cell to another. This is something that limits their proliferation. Cancer cells are genetically unstable, and they escape from their home tissues. They're invasive, they survive and proliferate in foreign sites, they metastasize. You see, if cells are listening to the signals from the cells around them, they wouldn't proliferate in another site because they wouldn't have the signals from the right kind of cells. Now, the immune system is routinely dealing with cancer. Natural killer cells are designed to deal with cancer in the circulatory system. Now, let's look at breast cancer as just an example. Suppose a cell has experienced these multiple damages to the DNA and it begins to divide and grow without control. Division takes place about every 100 days in a typical breast cancer. So after a year, you have about 12 cells. This is undetectable. After about 4 years, you have about 100,000 cells. This is still undetectable. After about 6 years, you have about 1 million cells. This is still undetectable. This is a mass about the size of a period at the end of a sentence on a printed page. And at this point, the cancer often spreads. After 10 years, you have 100 billion cells, and now 1 billion cells, and now it's detectable. It's about the size of a pencil eraser, and it has very often spread at this point. How long has this been going on? For 10 years, before we even detect it. So this is generally a fairly long process. So what should we do? The surgical approach can range from minimal to radical, and there is no significant advantage of one approach over another as far as survival of the patient is concerned. This is from Lancet, which is a British medical journal. So the simple approach is as effective as the radical approach. Despite advances in surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy, the death rate from breast cancer has not changed since 1900. And this is from a journal, Surgery, a study that was being reported on there. There's a gentleman, a doctor that I read an experience that he was describing. He had gone to a medical conference, and the doctor that was presenting the conference was talking about breast cancer surgery, radical mastectomy, and talking about how ineffective it was. And so the doctor that was writing of the incident said, he asked, well, if this isn't effective, why do you continue to do it? You've just told us how ineffective it is. Why do you continue to do it? And the doctor said, that's because that's the way I was trained. So if this is the training doctors have, this is what they know what to do, and so that's naturally going to be what they do. Now, let's look at some animal studies and see what we can learn about this. Dr. Campbell, that I mentioned, who was a nutrition researcher from Cornell University, heard about a study that had been done in India, and then he tried to replicate it in his own laboratory. He took some rats who had been raised to be susceptible to cancer, and gave them aflatoxin, which was a potent carcinogen. And then he put some of the rats, half the rats, on a 5% protein diet and half the rats on a 20% protein diet. Even though they got the same dose of carcinogen, the ones on the 5% protein diet, this foci response is the initial stages of cancer. And so the ones on a 5% protein diet developed much less cancer than the ones on the 20% protein diet. So then he wanted to see what effect the carcinogen had. So he gave one group of them a high dose of the aflatoxin, the carcinogen, another group a low dose. But the ones that were given the high dose of aflatoxin, he gave the low protein diet. The ones that gave the low dose of aflatoxin gave the high protein diet. And guess what? The diet was more influential than the aflatoxin. So then he varied the dose of aflatoxin, and we see when they had a high protein diet, the more aflatoxin they got, the more cancer that they got. But on the low protein diet, it didn't really seem to make a lot of difference. Now that doesn't mean we should just expose ourselves to carcinogens, but even if we are exposed to carcinogens, which we all are to a certain extent, there's radiation in the atmosphere, we're exposed to chemicals and so forth in the environment. And so we need to eat the foods that are going to minimize the ability to develop cancer. And then he tried different proteins. When he had a 20% protein casein, there was a lot of cancer. On 20% gluten, there was a lot less. And on 5% casein, of course, it was reduced. And soy protein seemed to have a similar effect to the gluten. So the animal protein, which was the casein, had tended to cause cancer more than the plant proteins such as the gluten and the soy. So how does this work? Well, here we have two areas on our farm where we had done some excavating and planted grass seed, and the grass seed came up, the other one it didn't. And actually we planted the grass seed first on the one where it hasn't come up here. So what made the difference? Well, actually, we feel like we planted some grass seed there and it may have gotten frosted before it sprouted, or the other didn't. It was planted later. But, for instance, you plant seed, you've planted the seed, but it has to have sunshine, it has to have rain for it to sprout. So, planting the seed is like the carcinogen. Watering it in the sunshine is like the the kind of diet that we eat. So, casein was the milk protein. And here we see different kinds of animals. And the protein that humans receive is a very low concentration of, the milk that humans have is a very low concentration of protein. And most animals have a higher concentration of protein, especially when they double their weight more rapidly. What's the purpose of milk? The purpose of milk is to make a baby grow. And for babies, we want to grow. But for people, after we're mature, we don't want growth to continue. We want growth to be controlled. Then the same nutrition researcher, Dr. Campbell, did a study in China in which he studied a huge number of people with a consistent genetic background. And he found that blood cholesterol, as the levels of blood cholesterol decreased, the levels of cancer of all these kinds decreased. And these are the kinds of things that made the blood cholesterol go up or go down. Animal products made the cholesterol go up. Plant products made the cholesterol go down. So here we see then the effects of these foods and the benefit of the foods God has given to us. Grains, fruits, nuts, and vegetables constitute the diet chosen for us by our Creator. These foods, prepared in as simple and natural a manner as possible, are the most healthful and nourishing. And then science agrees with that, saying eat a whole food, plant-based diet while minimizing the consumption of refined foods, added salt, and added fats. So we can see the food God gives us is the food that's healthful and that works with the body's mechanisms to help prevent cancer.
Stories of a West Virginia Doctor, written by Dr. Harold D. Allman. A collection of 55 short stories about his experience as a small-town doctor in central West Virginia. And Tender Loving Care. Stories from a West Virginia Doctor, Volume 2, written by Dr. Greenbrier Allman, using videotapes to write 70 additional stories of his father's very colorful life as a small-town doctor. They can be found for purchase at Amazon.com and most local bookstores. Tune into Channel 3 Buckhannon for Tender Loving Care with Dr. Greenbrier Allman, where he talks about the connection between Christianity and medicine.